All right, good morning, everybody. We are live here at San Antonio, Texas, tracking the hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, now approaching the southwestern tip of Florida. You'll see just not too far from the eye wall is Fort Myers. North of that is Tampa, and a lot of the keys are seeing a lot of the cloud cover associated with this storm. And this storm is very powerful. Matter of fact, winds are at 155 miles per hour. It's moving towards the northeast at 9 with a central pressure at 937 millibars. So it's very deep in pressure. It's very strong, but it is nearing the coast. Why that's important? Well, the farther inland these storms go, these hurricanes go, they start to battle very shallow water. And what they need to survive, and not only to stay very strong, is very deep, warm to hot ocean water. So that's why some forecast guidance and models have been hinting at somewhat of a weakening system on approach to Fort Myers. However, this is still a strong Category 4 hurricane, major in intensity. Winds are again at 155. For it to be considered a Category 5, for it to be that, it needs to reach sustained winds of 157 miles per hour or greater. And you'll see it's not too far from that. So this is a very powerful Category 4 hurricane. Now, with that being said, at this point in time, any friends or family in this part of the Gulf, if you have friends near Key West or towards Fort Myers or Sarasota or south of Tampa, at this point, the power of the hurricane does not matter. Everyone needs to be inside, bunkering down for this storm in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Here in San Antonio, it's quiet, it's sunny, it's hot. We're on the drier side of the storm, well away and well removed from Hurricane Ian and any of its effects. But you'll see Hurricane Ian, Category 4, 155. And as I zoom in and show you what's happening, I mean, just intense tropical bands of rain continuing to crank in from the south. Now, the problem with Florida and Hurricane Ian moving in for the next couple of days, it's going to slow down somewhat in speed. And with it being on both sides of water, I mean, you have the Gulf of Mexico to the west, you have Atlantic waters to the east, it has enough fuel to keep going. So despite it weakening in the forecast, it's still going to have fuel to work with. So rain is going to continue for areas along the coast from Fort Myers, Sarasota, from Fort Pierce to West Palm Beach, and all the way down to Miami. All of them in central and southern Florida for the next 24 to 48 hours are going to be under the gun for storm surge, in addition to flash flooding, and not to mention the sustained wind speed property damage that this storm and hurricane can bring in over the next couple of days. So you can see the eye wall. How far is it offshore, and when is it expected to make landfall? It's expected to make landfall today. So around 1 or 2 p.m. is the latest on the Hurricane Center's outlook. But take a look, it's not too far from land. So keep in mind, for a hurricane to make landfall or a tropical storm or a tropical system, its center of its eye wall needs to move on land. Not the right side of the eye wall or the left side. The center of the eye has to move directly over in a barrier island or anywhere near Fort Myers. So once it reaches land, the center point of the storm, that's when it's considered a landfall. And you'll see, I mean, just so much rainfall moving into Fort Myers. As I zoom in and show you what's happening, the eye wall is about, let's say, 40 miles from the coast. And considering it's moving at about 9 miles an hour, well, that means it would probably make it to the coast sometime this early afternoon. So moving 9 miles per hour towards the northeast, its eye wall is about 40 miles from the coast. So again, about 4 to 5 hours until landfall, maybe 1, 2, 3 o'clock. And sometimes these storms, on approach to any coastline, they can slow down dramatically. There are times where hurricanes can just stall. And latest forecast guidance, the last 48 hours, some models considered that. I mean, near Sarasota, Tampa Bay, and Fort Myers, some of these models just kept it hugging near the coast for the next couple of days. So again, we're expecting landfall, and I'll show you the latest track on that in just a bit. Let me just find it as we're going through the forecast. And again, this is the eastern Gulf of Mexico. San Antonio, all of Texas is considered just dry and sunny for the next 7 days. But it's really this part of the world and this part of the Gulf that's seeing the brunt of Hurricane Ian at this hour. So let's look at the latest forecast. So here's the Category 4 hurricane through about, let's say, 3 p.m. That's when it starts to really move inland, north of Fort Myers. And the thing is, Fort Myers and most of the western Florida peninsula are underneath hurricane warnings. Winds of excess 74 to 85 miles per hour, if not greater than that. And you saw the sustained wind speeds around Hurricane Ian. they're up to 155 miles an hour. So if you're caught inside that deep eye wall, pretty much 20 to 25 miles outside the center circulation, that's where sustained winds could get up to 150 miles per hour. But for the most part, Miami will see winds of excess of 60 to 70 miles per hour. It's really around Fort Myers, Sarasota, and south of Tampa that are going to see the brunt of property and wind damage, not to mention the pushing of water, the storm surge. And remember, these storms, let me rewind and show you what's going on. These storms spin counterclockwise. So as I draw on the jet stream and these little arrows, so the water is being pulled in from the south and southwest. In addition to tropical feeder bands drenching just so much of Florida, water is being pushed inland as it spins counterclockwise. So that's the inundation of seawater, right? So any seawall that's near Fort Myers likely going to be inundated and pushed over that because storm surge forecast amounts are up to 8 to 12 feet in this part of Florida as the water keeps to continue to push inland. Now, the thing with Tampa and what has improved in their forecast is as the winds spin around the center, the winds are going to move outside from Tampa. So they're going to be offshore winds, and that's going to help with Tampa. However, it's going to mean worse conditions for Fort Myers and Sarasota and portions just northwest of Miami and along the western coast of the Florida Peninsula. So that is the latest on that. Again, 155 mile an hour winds. The latest forecast guidance brings it up to Daytona Beach, probably sometime tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon. Let me just zoom out and show you what we got, and I'll just show you the entire state. Because a lot of folks are watching from Jacksonville, a lot of folks are watching from the Carolinas, and while it will weaken a lot as it moves over land and loses water source, it'll still be pretty strong and have access to water, and that'll continue to crank in more water and more rain for that part of the world and that part of the Gulf of Mexico. So here's the latest forecast come. You can see through Thursday night, tomorrow evening, and even Wednesday morning, it's going to cross over. So I wouldn't rule out heavy flooding for Jacksonville, the northeastern part of Florida, just because, again, these things spin counterclockwise. So it's going to drive in not just storm surge, but heavy rainfall for southeastern portions of Georgia, the northeastern tip of Florida, and into the Carolinas, despite it weakening into a tropical storm Thursday into Friday. In the meantime, landfall is imminent later on this afternoon for Hurricane Ian, likely as a Category 4. Winds are at 155 miles an hour. You'll notice the Bahama Islands, they are also underneath tropical storm watches and warnings, and that's just in prep for any storm surge to move across Florida and move farther east to that part of the Bahama Islands. But again, the direct direction of this system is going to do farther north, and that's going to be a lot of heavy rain and flooding for now the east coast of Florida Thursday into Friday as we wrap up the week. So that's the latest on the forecast guidance, and that is the latest on the forecast cone. I'll zoom out and show you the entire east coast. Where is this storm heading after Florida? You'll see as we put this into that, it'll probably likely move into South Carolina as a tropical storm. So it'll make a second landfall, likely as a storm of 45 to 55 miles per hour or greater. And then that's when it'll weaken into a remnant low. And then that's when we'll finally say goodbye to Ian. And that's not until probably this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, as it moves into Virginia and the Appalachian Mountains, where the wind shear in that part of the country will likely tear it apart very quickly. But the thing is, we'll deal with Ian for at least the next 2 to 3 days as it makes a second landfall somewhere in South Carolina. In the meantime, again, Florida is under the gun for storm surge, heavy rain, and sustained winds of 155 miles an hour around Fort Myers. And you can see that is the latest on every single warning and the latest on the forecast cone for Ian. Now here's another high-resolution model. This is the IBM or the graph model, and I'll reload it and show you what we have. You can see it's initializing pretty well south of Tampa, moving right into Fort Myers. And you'll see as we put this into motion through 2 p.m., it makes landfall sometime between then 1, 2, 3 o'clock. Heavy tropical bands of rain continue to swirl around central portions of the Sunshine State. And then you'll see as it moves right over land, the circulation will be disrupted, and that's when it's going to start to weaken very quickly. But in the meantime, from Tampa to Jacksonville to Orlando, even from Fort Myers due north, that's where heavy rain is going to continue to crank in. But the flooding threat shifts further northeast towards Jacksonville Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, as this system, although it weakens, will throw in a lot of rain and a lot of moisture towards that part of Florida, and then again towards South Carolina, southeastern portions of Georgia, and then that's when it exits and moves back farther inland by Friday, Saturday, and then weakens as a remnant low. Back here at home, though, it's quiet. So if you have plans outdoors in San Antonio today or anywhere across the state of Texas, it's going to be breezy. It'll be nice. It'll be comfortable at 90 degrees. But again, we will keep the latest on Hurricane Ian as it makes landfall later on this afternoon. The eye wall in diameter, it's insane. I mean, I'll zoom in and let's kind of just stop the clock and let's show you how far and how large the diameter of this eye wall is. Probably about 20 miles in distance. So as it moves into Fort Myers, that part of Florida will be brief and quiet for probably an hour or two as it enters the eye. But anywhere around it in the eye wall, that's where winds are going to get up to 150 miles an hour. That's where winds are going to push water in, storm surge up to 8 to 12 feet near Fort Myers, Sarasota, and again, the southwestern portion of Florida. We talked about the forecast cone. It also is going to churn the water. So that's going to mean coastal flooding for a big part of Florida, and we'll just stop the clock right here through Wednesday night, Thursday morning. Coastal waters, average wave heights are going to be up to 5 to 10 feet, if not larger than that, up to 20 feet in some of these areas that'll go into the barrier islands, into the canals just around Fort Myers and Tampa Bay. Offshore waters will be up to 15 to 20 feet, and that's around pretty much the center of the eye wall right now. One more thing before we get back to radar and the latest on Hurricane Ian, look at the history. You can see back on Monday at 7 p.m., that advisory from the Hurricane Center, winds were at 100 miles per hour. That was only considered a Category 2 hurricane, but it strengthened rapidly. And for a system or a tropical storm or a hurricane to drop that far in pressure and increase that amount of wind speed in that short amount of time, that's rapid intensification. So up to 125 mile per hour sustained winds earlier Tuesday morning, yesterday morning, and then during brief amounts of time between Tuesday night and Wednesday, it weakened into a 115 to a 120 mile per hour hurricane, but that's still considered major. And then it jumped up to 140 earlier this morning at 5 a.m., and now it's at 155, a strong and powerful Category 4 hurricane. Okay, so we'll zoom out and show you the latest on Hurricane Ian. We'll get another update from the Hurricane Center at 1 o'clock. I mean, that's when they come out with new advisories, and that should be the time when the Hurricane Center declares or gives us an official landfall location. And again, likely just around Fort Myers, which we'll see right now is seeing a heavy amount of rainfall, but the eye wall, and now the eye is now moving closer and closer to those outer islands right there just west of Fort Myers and just south of Port Charlotte and let's say Marco Island. It's going to be far north of Marco Island, but the eye is now barreling towards Fort Myers. And again, 20 miles in diameter. It's a very large eye. And around that eye wall, about 20 miles outside from the eye, that's where the sustained winds are 150, 55 miles per hour. Heavy rainfall. These training thunderstorms are continuing to crank in rain nonstop, one thunderstorm after the other. That's what leads to flash flooding around a thunderstorm or even around a hurricane, because it just continues to crank in more and more rain and it doesn't stop. And then you talk about the water being pushed in from the coast. It's a bad combination. And that is the latest on Hurricane Ian. Central pressure 937 millibar. Northeast at 9 is the direction and movement. Sustained winds are at 155 miles an hour just off the coast. I'll zoom out and show you this right here. That is the expansive reach of Hurricane Ian. All the tropical bands of rain continue to move into Daytona Beach, Jacksonville, Florida, and now again, landfall is imminent as it moves towards Fort Myers, likely around 1 or 2 o'clock later on this afternoon. We'll keep it on this radar for the next several hours, as I know a lot of folks have family and friends in this part of the Gulf of Mexico, so we'll leave it here and give you updates on KENS 5 at noon, and we'll leave this up until it makes landfall later on this afternoon. Again, one more time, guys, winds are at 155 miles an hour, likely to make landfall sometime around 1 or 2 o'clock today near Fort Myers. as a Category 4 hurricane, and heavy rain, tropical downpours are going to come down in buckets and continue to drench this part of Florida and continue to lead to high storm surge values and heavy rainfall for the next 48 hours as it moves across the state tomorrow and then moves towards the Carolinas on Saturday and Sunday. In the meantime, a Category 4 hurricane. For it to be a Category 5, we'll see what the latest update says at 1 p.m. from the Hurricane Center. But it looks like Category 4 is the trend right now for landfall. And at this point, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's just going to be catastrophic damage for Fort Myers. Heavy rain, water being pushed inland, winds up to 155, wind gusts up to 165 miles an hour. And that's specifically around the eye wall. So that is the latest on Hurricane Ian, and we'll give you more updates in the next several hours as it makes landfall around 1 and 2 o'clock near Fort Myers.